The meeting room felt like a trap the moment I walked in. My boss, Greg, was sitting there with this twisted little smile, the kind you see when someone's about to enjoy hurting you. 6 years of working my tail off, 6 years of proving myself over and over again, and I thought this was finally it, my promotion to senior director. Natasha, he said, not even bothering to stand up. I've got some news about the promotion we discussed. My heart started racing. This was supposed to be my moment. We've decided to go in a different direction. Someone more suitable emerged for the position. The words hit me like I'd been punched. 6 years. 6 years of staying late, of covering for him when he messed up client presentations, of making him look good in front of upper management. 6 years of watching less qualified people get promoted while I kept getting told to be patient. Someone more suitable? I managed to say. Trevor from the Atlanta office. Fresh perspective, you know. Sometimes you need someone who isn't so embedded in the old ways of doing things. Trevor, the guy who'd been with the company for 8 months. The guy I'd had to correct 3 times in our last video call because he didn't understand our client retention strategies. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even let my face change expression. Because in that moment, sitting across from Greg as he basically told me I wasn't good enough after everything I'd given this company, I remembered something very important, something he had no idea I knew. Before I dive deeper into what happened next, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're listening from? Because I want to know where my story is reaching across the world. And please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how this all plays out. Because trust me, you're not going to believe what I did next. See, what Greg didn't know was that for the past 6 years, I'd been paying for his mother's care at Sunrise Manor, the nicest assisted living facility in our city. $4,000 every single month, automatically debited from my personal account. How did this start? Pure accident. About 6.5 years ago, I was helping Greg organize his office because he'd asked me to handle some personal filing while he was out of town. I opened what I thought was a client invoice, but it was actually a letter addressed to him from Sunrise Manor. Final notice. His mother's account was 3 months behind, totaling $12,000, and they were threatening to discharge her if payment wasn't received within 7 days. I shouldn't have read it, but once I saw the words final notice and discharge, I couldn't stop myself. The letter went on to explain that Mrs. Patterson would need to be transferred to a state-funded facility if the family couldn't meet their financial obligations. That evening, I did something probably crazy. I called Sunrise Manor pretending to be from a financial assistance program, asking about their anonymous donor options. Turns out they had a whole system set up for families who wanted to quietly help with residents' care costs. Rich people guilt money mostly. I set up an automatic payment system that same week. $4,000 every month, listed as coming from an anonymous benefactor in their system. I never planned to tell Greg. I figured it was insurance, something I could use if I ever needed leverage. But here's the thing that made it all so perfect. Greg never knew the payments had stopped when his account went delinquent. He thought the facility was just being patient with him while he figured out his finances. When the anonymous payments started showing up, covering his mother's full monthly costs, he was told simply that a generous donor had chosen to help. And Greg? He took full credit. I watched him for 6 years, telling everyone who would listen about how he was sacrificing to take care of his aging mother, how he was working extra hours to afford her care, how proud he was to be the son who stepped up when family needed him. He even got teary-eyed at the company holiday party last year, talking about how his mother always told people what a wonderful provider he was. His mother, meanwhile, had no idea about the anonymous donor. As far as she knew, Greg was paying every penny of her care costs. She bragged about him constantly to the other residents, to the staff, to anyone who would listen. My Gregory worked so hard to keep me here, she'd say. He's such a good boy, making sure his mama is comfortable. The irony was beautiful. Greg was genuinely stressed about money. I could see it eating at him. He'd complain about being stretched thin, about how expensive everything was getting, about how he worried constantly about being able to afford his mother's care long term. He had no idea that the financial pressure he thought he was under had been lifted 6 years ago by the same employee he kept passing over for promotions. But that Tuesday morning, sitting in that meeting room, listening to him tell me I wasn't suitable for advancement, something shifted inside me. The insurance I'd been carrying all these years suddenly felt like it was time to cash it in. I looked at Greg with his smug little expression and said, "I understand completely. Trevor sounds like a great choice." "I'm glad you're taking this so well," he said, actually sounding surprised. "Some people don't handle disappointment with such professionalism." "Oh, I've learned a lot about professionalism working here," I told him, "especially about how important it is to be honest and transparent about your contributions." He nodded like he'd given me some profound wisdom. "Exactly. That's the kind of mature attitude that'll serve you well in your current role." Current role. Like I should be grateful to keep doing the same job I'd been overqualified for since year 2. I shook his hand, thanked him for his time, and walked back to my desk. Then I opened my laptop and navigated to my bank's website. The automatic payment to Sunrise Manor was scheduled to process the next day of $4,000, like clockwork, like it had been for 72 months straight. I stared at that payment screen for about 30 seconds, thinking about Greg's mother telling everyone what a devoted son she had, thinking about Greg accepting praise for sacrifices he'd never made, thinking about someone more suitable getting the job I'd earned. I clicked Cancel Automatic Payment. Then I called Sunrise Manor's billing office. "Hi, this is regarding the anonymous donor account for Mrs. Eleanor Patterson in room 247. I need to terminate the monthly contributions effective immediately." The billing clerk was very understanding. "Anonymous donors change their circumstances all the time," she explained. They'd send a courtesy notification to the family that the assistance had ended, just so there wouldn't be any surprises when the next bill came due. "When should they expect to receive that notification?" I asked. "We typically send those letters on Fridays, so the family has the weekend to process the information before having to make any immediate decisions." Perfect. It was Tuesday. That gave me exactly 3 days. I spent those 3 days working normally, attending meetings, responding to Greg's requests with the same efficiency I'd always shown. He seemed pleased that I wasn't being difficult about the promotion situation. Wednesday, he even complimented my work on a client presentation, saying things like this were exactly why he valued having me in my current position. Thursday, he sent an email to the whole team about how important it was to support Trevor's transition into the senior director role, and how he knew everyone would show the same dedication and teamwork that had made our department so successful. Friday morning, I arrived at work early and spent some time organizing my desk. I had a feeling things were about to get very interesting. Around 11 o'clock, Greg's office phone rang. Then it rang again, and again. By noon, he was pacing behind his glass office walls, holding what looked like a very intense conversation. I couldn't hear the words, but his body language was getting more agitated by the minute. Friday afternoon, he left early without saying goodbye to anyone. Monday morning, Greg looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was messy, his shirt was wrinkled, and he kept checking his phone every few seconds. He barely made eye contact with anyone during our weekly team meeting. Tuesday, I was at my desk reviewing quarterly reports when Greg appeared beside me. Not at my desk, not in my cubicle space, but literally right beside my chair, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see that his hands were shaking slightly. "Natasha," he said, and his voice sounded strange, tight. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer." I looked up at him with what I hoped was an expression of polite curiosity. "Of course, what's on your mind?" "The anonymous donor who's been helping with my mother's care at Sunrise Manor. The payment stopped last week, and He paused, running his hand through his hair. "I need to know if you know anything about who that person might be." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. 6 years of preparation had led to this exact conversation. "Anonymous donor?" I said, tilting my head slightly. "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking." "Someone has been paying $4,000 a month toward my mother's assisted living costs for the past 6 years. The facility won't tell me who it is because of privacy policies, but the payments just stopped, and my mother is going to be transferred to state care by Friday if I can't come up with the money. The desperation in his voice was perfect. Not just panic about the money, but something deeper. The realization that everything he'd built his identity around was crumbling. "That's a lot of money," I said sympathetically. "I had no idea you were getting help with those costs. You always made it sound like you were handling everything yourself." His face went pale. "You can't tell anyone about this. Please, if people at work found out that I haven't actually been paying for my mother's care myself." "But why would that matter?" I asked innocently. "I mean, if someone was generous enough to help your family, that's wonderful. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it." "You don't understand," he said, and now his voice was getting desperate. "I've been telling everyone, including my mother, that I was covering all her expenses. If she finds out that someone else has been paying this whole time, and that I had no idea who it was." I watched understanding dawn in his eyes. Not just that he was about to lose his mother's care, but that his entire reputation was built on a lie. 6 years of colleagues respecting him for being such a devoted son. 6 years of his mother being proud of his sacrifice. 6 years of taking credit for generosity that wasn't his. "Greg," I said gently, "is there something specific you think I might know about this situation?" He stared at me for a long moment. I could practically see his brain working, trying to figure out if there was any way this could be a coincidence. The timing was too perfect. "The anonymous donor stops giving the exact week he denies my promotion." "Natasha," he said slowly, "please tell me you didn't." I stood up from my desk and looked him directly in the eyes. "I thought," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and professional, "that someone more suitable would handle the situation." The color drained completely from his face. "You've been paying for my mother's care for 6 years?" "Anonymous donor," I corrected. I would never want to take credit for something like that, just like I would never want to take credit for work I didn't do, or achievements that weren't mine. He grabbed the edge of my desk like he needed support to stay standing. "Why?" he whispered. "Why did I help your mother, or why did I stop?" "Both. Either. I don't understand." I sat back down and continued reviewing my quarterly reports, not looking at him as I spoke. "I helped because I found that final notice letter 6 years ago when you asked me to organize your office files. Your mother was going to be transferred to state care, and I had the means to prevent that from happening. I stopped because I realized that someone more suitable should probably be handling family financial responsibilities." The silence stretched between us. I could hear him breathing, quick and shallow. "How much?" he asked finally. "4,000 a month for 70. 2 months. You can do the math. $288,000. Plus interest on the credit cards I'd used for the first year before I got my finances organized enough to pay directly from savings." "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "Your mother's being transferred Friday unless payment arrangements are made," I said, still looking at my computer screen. "The facility director suggested you might want to visit some state care options this week, just to prepare her for the transition." "State care," he repeated, like the words were foreign. "I'm sure she'll understand once you explain that the anonymous donor situation changed. Though I imagine it might be confusing for her, since she's been telling everyone how proud she is that her son can afford such a nice facility." Greg made a sound like he was choking. "The staff mentioned she talks about you constantly, how hard you work to keep her comfortable, how she brags to the other residents about having such a successful son who takes care of his family. I'm sure that won't change, even after she finds out about the actual financial situation." "You don't understand," he said, and now there were tears in his voice. "She'll never forgive me, not for lying to her for 6 years, but for not being the son she thought I was." And that's when I finally looked up at him. "Greg," I said, "I've spent 6 years watching you take credit for my work, my ideas, my contributions to this company. I've watched you accept praise for sacrifices you never made and achievements you never earned. I've watched you build a reputation on foundations that weren't yours." His legs seemed to give out and he sank into the chair beside my desk. "But I never knew," he said weakly. "I never knew you were paying for her care. That's what makes it so perfect." I told him. You built your entire identity as the devoted son on something you had no control over. Just like you've built your management reputation on work you didn't actually do. The realization was settling over him now, the full scope of what was happening. Not just the immediate crisis with his mother's care, but the complete destruction of everything he'd used to define himself. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I don't want anything, Greg. I wanted that promotion, but you made it very clear that someone more suitable was available." "The promotion," he said, understanding finally clicking. "You could have told me. Any time in the past 6 years, you could have told me what you were doing. And what would you have done? Given me a raise? Promoted me? Or would you have found a way to make it about how generous and forward-thinking you were as a manager, having an employee who cared so much about company family values?" He couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. "Your mother has 4 days," I said, turning back to my computer. "I'm sure someone suitable will figure out a solution." Greg sat there for another minute, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Then he stood up slowly and walked back to his office. I watched him through the glass walls as he sat at his desk with his head in his hands. But this was just the beginning, because what Greg didn't realize yet was that his problems were about to get much, much worse. That afternoon, I heard Greg on the phone with multiple people. First, what sounded like his bank, asking about emergency loan options. Then, someone who was probably his mother, his voice getting higher and more strained as the conversation went on. By 4 o'clock, he was calling assisted living facilities, asking about payment plans and financial assistance programs. Wednesday morning, Greg looked worse. His usual confidence was completely gone, replaced by this frantic energy that everyone in the office was starting to notice. During our team meeting, he kept losing his train of thought mid-sentence and checking his phone under the table. "Everything okay, Greg?" asked Miranda from accounting. "Fine, fine," he said quickly. "Just some family logistics to sort out." But it wasn't fine, and it was about to get so much worse. Thursday around lunchtime, I got a call at my direct line from someone I wasn't expecting. "Is this Natasha Chen? This is Patricia Williams from Sunrise Manor's administrative office." My heart started beating faster. "Yes, this is Natasha. I'm calling because we have a rather unusual situation with the Patterson account, and your name came up in our records as an emergency contact." Emergency contact. I'd forgotten about that detail from 6 years ago when I'd set up the payment system. They'd asked for someone to contact if there were ever issues with the anonymous donor account, and I'd given them my information. "What kind of situation?" I asked. "Well, Mr. Patterson came in yesterday quite upset about the anonymous donor payments ending. He was asking a lot of questions about who had been making the contributions, and he seemed to think it might be someone he worked with." This was interesting. "I see. The thing is, he's been telling his mother and our staff for years that he was personally covering all her care costs. But when we pulled the account history to help him understand the payment situation, it became clear that he hasn't made a single payment toward her care since 2019. 2019, the year I'd started the anonymous donations. "That must be confusing," I said carefully. "Miss Chen, I need to ask you directly. Are you the anonymous donor who's been covering Mrs. Patterson's expenses?" I took a deep breath. I was, yes. "Can I ask why you stopped the payments?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for, though I hadn't expected it to come from the facility directly. "My circumstances changed," I said. "I'm no longer in a position to continue that level of financial assistance." "I understand completely," Patricia said. "These arrangements change all the time. But I'm calling because Mr. Patterson is making some rather serious accusations about the timing of your decision, and frankly, we're concerned about the family dynamics here." "What kind of accusations?" "He's suggesting that you deliberately timed the payment cancellation to coincide with some workplace conflict. He's quite agitated and has been making phone calls from his mother's room, disturbing other residents. He's also upset our billing staff by demanding information we legally cannot provide about donor privacy." Greg was spiraling, and he was doing it publicly. "Patricia," I said, "I made those payments for 6 years out of personal choice. I stopped them for personal reasons. Mr. Patterson's workplace behavior has nothing to do with his mother's care, and I'm sorry he's implying otherwise. Of course. I just wanted to touch base with you directly because Mrs. Patterson is asking a lot of questions about why her son seems so upset, and we want to make sure we're handling this situation appropriately. After I hung up, I realized Greg's problems were multiplying in ways he probably hadn't anticipated. Not only was he facing financial crisis and family humiliation, but he was creating a paper trail of erratic behavior that could follow him professionally. Friday morning, the day his mother was supposed to be transferred, Greg didn't come to work. But Trevor did. Trevor, the golden boy from Atlanta who'd gotten my promotion, walked into our morning meeting looking confused and uncomfortable. "Has anyone heard from Greg?" he asked. "We were supposed to review the transition timeline today, but he's not answering his phone or email." Miranda checked her calendar. He didn't put anything about being out of office on the shared schedule. "This is weird," said Kyle from our development team. "Greg never misses meetings without notice." I said nothing, but I was wondering what was happening at Sunrise Manor. Had Greg managed to come up with the money? Had his mother been transferred? Was he dealing with the fallout of 6 years of lies finally coming to light? My question was answered around noon when my desk phone rang again. "Natasha? This is Patricia from Sunrise Manor again. I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a situation that requires some clarification." "What's happening?" "Mrs. Patterson's transfer was supposed to happen this morning, but Mr. Patterson showed up with a cashier's check for $12,000, enough to cover the immediate debt and buy some time. However, there's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" "Mrs. Patterson apparently overheard her son arguing with our billing director about payment histories and anonymous donors. She became very upset and demanded to know what was being discussed. When Mr. Patterson tried to explain the situation to her." Patricia paused, and I could hear voices in the background. "Let's just say Mrs. Patterson is not happy about learning that someone else has been paying for her care while she's been bragging about her son's financial support for the past 6 years. Oh no, this was going even worse than I'd expected. She's currently refusing to speak to her son and has requested that he not be allowed in her room until she decides whether she can forgive him for making her look like a fool to everyone in this place." The devastation was complete. Not only had Greg's financial identity been destroyed, but his relationship with his mother was potentially ruined forever. "Patricia, I never intended for Mrs. Patterson to be hurt by this situation," I said, and I meant it. "I genuinely just wanted to help when I started making those payments." "I understand, and please don't feel responsible for the family dynamics here. But there is one more thing I need to mention. Mr. Patterson has been asking our staff for your personal contact information. We haven't provided it, of course, but he seems quite determined to speak with you directly." That afternoon, Greg finally showed up at work. He looked like he'd been through a war. His shirt was stained, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were red-rimmed like he'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. He walked straight to my desk, without even stopping at his office. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely controlled. "I'm working," I replied without looking up from my computer. "My mother won't speak to me. She thinks I'm a liar and a fraud. The entire staff at her facility knows I haven't been paying her bills. I had to borrow money against my house to keep her from being transferred. And even then, she might never forgive me." I finally looked at him. "I'm sorry your mother is upset." "Sorry?" His voice was getting louder, and people were starting to look over. "You destroyed my family, and you're sorry?" "Greg," I said calmly, "I helped your family for 6 years. You destroyed your own reputation by taking credit for something you didn't do. You could have told me. You could have said something. And then what? You would have felt obligated to pay me back? You would have given me that promotion out of guilt? You would have treated me differently because you owed me money?" He stared at me, and I could see him realizing that I was right. If he'd known about the payments, it would have changed everything between us, but not necessarily in ways that would have been good for my career. "Besides," I continued, "I thought someone more suitable would handle the situation." "Stop saying that," he snapped. "Why? It's what you told me about my promotion. Someone more suitable emerged. Trevor was a better choice. I was too embedded in the old ways of doing things, remember?" That's when Trevor himself appeared beside us, looking extremely uncomfortable. Hey, Greg, I've been trying to reach you all morning. We really need to go over these client files before my presentation on Monday. Greg turned to look at Trevor, and I watched something shift in his expression. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of desperate calculation. Actually, Trevor, Greg said, I think we need to discuss something about your promotion. Trevor looked confused. What about it? Well, it's come to my attention that there might have been some oversight in the selection process, some qualifications that weren't properly considered. I felt my stomach drop. Greg was going to try to fix this by giving me the promotion now, thinking it would somehow undo the damage. But it was too late for that, and frankly, I didn't want the job anymore. Not like this. Greg, I said quietly, don't. Don't what? He demanded. Don't try to make this right? Don't acknowledge that you've been the backbone of this team for 6 years while I was taking credit for everything you did? Trevor was looking back and forth between us like he'd walked into the middle of a movie he didn't understand. What's going on here? Trevor asked. What's going on? Greg said, his voice getting bitter, is that I've been a complete fraud, and the person who should have gotten your job has been carrying my entire life for the past 6 years. Greg, stop, I said, standing up. People were really staring now, and this was getting out of hand. No, I won't stop, he said, turning to address the whole office. Everyone should know what kind of manager I've been. Everyone should know that Natasha has been doing half my job while I took all the credit, and that she's been paying for my mother's medical care while I let everyone think I was some kind of devoted son. The office went completely silent. She spent almost $300,000 of her own money keeping my mother in assisted living. And when I denied her a promotion last week, she stopped the payments. And you know what? She was absolutely right to do it. I wanted to disappear. This was not how I'd wanted this to go. My revenge was supposed to be private, personal, a lesson for Greg about consequences. I didn't want to be the office hero or the subject of workplace gossip. Greg, I said firmly, you need to go home. I can't go home, he said, and now he was definitely crying. My mother won't see me. My wife is furious about the money I borrowed against the house. I've spent 6 years lying to everyone about who I really am, and now everyone knows. Trevor cleared his throat awkwardly. Maybe we should reschedule our meeting? There is no meeting, Greg said. There is no promotion. Natasha should have been senior director years ago, and the only reason she wasn't is because I was too insecure and too much of a coward to admit that she was better at this job than I'll ever be. That's when our department head, Lisa, appeared at the edge of our workspace. Greg, I need to see you in my office immediately, she said, her voice tight with the kind of control that meant someone was in serious trouble. Lisa, Greg said, wiping his eyes, before you say anything, you should know that I've been fundamentally dishonest about my capabilities and contributions to this department. Greg, my office, now. As they walked away, I realized that my quiet personal revenge had just become a very public workplace crisis. Trevor was still standing there looking shell-shocked, and everyone in the office was pretending to work while obviously listening to every word. Natasha, Trevor said quietly, is what he said true? About the promotion and the money and everything? I sat back down at my desk and opened my laptop. Trevor, I said, you got the job fair and square. Management made their decision based on what they thought was best for the company. But if you were more qualified, qualifications don't always determine outcomes, I told him. Sometimes other factors come into play. He stood there for another minute, clearly wanting to ask more questions, but I kept working and eventually he walked away. 20 minutes later, Lisa came back without Greg. Natasha, can I see you privately? We went to the small conference room, and Lisa closed the door. I need you to tell me what really happened here, she said. So I did. I told her about finding the letter, about the anonymous payments, about Greg taking credit for his mother's care while genuinely believing he was financially struggling. I told her about the promotion decision and my choice to stop the payments. You paid almost $300,000 for your boss's mother's medical care, Lisa repeated slowly. I did. For 6 years. Yes. And he never knew. Not until this week. Lisa leaned back in her chair. Natasha, this is the most complicated workplace situation I've ever encountered. I understand if there need to be consequences, I said. I know my actions created a conflict of interest, even if Greg didn't know about it. Consequences? Lisa looked at me like I was crazy. Natasha, you basically subsidized an employee's family obligations out of your own pocket for 6 years. That's not a conflict of interest, I don't even know what that is. It became a conflict when I used it as leverage, I admitted. Did you, though? Or did you just stop doing something incredibly generous when you realized that generosity wasn't being appreciated? I didn't answer that. Greg has been placed on administrative leave pending a review of his management practices, Lisa said. Apparently, this situation has prompted some other team members to come forward with concerns about taking credit for their work and contributions. That surprised me. I hadn't known other people had noticed. We're going to need to restructure this department, Lisa continued. And frankly, we're going to need someone to lead that restructuring process. Someone who understands the team dynamics and has the respect of the other employees. I looked at her carefully. What are you asking me? I'm asking if you'd be interested in Greg's position, not the senior director role that went to Trevor, the department head position, Greg's job. I sat there for a moment, processing what she was saying. 6 months ago, I would have jumped at this opportunity. But now, after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I wanted to stay with this company at all. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course, take the weekend. But Natasha, I want you to know that what you did for Greg's family, regardless of how it ended, shows a level of character that's rare in the corporate world. We'd be lucky to have you in leadership. That evening, I drove to Sunrise Manor. I'd been thinking about Mrs. Patterson all day, worried about how she was handling everything. When I got to the front desk, I asked if it would be possible to visit her briefly. Are you family? The receptionist asked. No, but I'm the person who was helping with her financial arrangements. I wanted to make sure she was okay. The receptionist made a quick phone call, then nodded. Room 247, but please keep it brief. She's had a difficult day. I knocked softly on Mrs. Patterson's door and heard a weak, "Come in." She was sitting in her chair by the window, looking smaller and older than I'd expected. When she saw me, her eyes widened slightly. Are you the girl who was paying for my care? Yes, ma'am. I'm Natasha. Sit down, dear, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I need to understand something. I sat and waited. Why? She asked simply. I found a letter saying you were going to be transferred to a less comfortable place, I told her. I had the means to prevent that, so I did. For 6 years. Yes, ma'am. And my son never knew. No, ma'am. She was quiet for a long time, looking out the window. He's a good boy, she said finally. Not perfect, but good. He just wanted everyone to think he was better than he really was. I know, I said. Are you angry with him? I thought about that. I was, but mostly I'm just disappointed. He made you feel small, she said, not asking. Yes. I'm sorry about that, dear. And I'm sorry he took credit for your kindness. That wasn't right. Mrs. Patterson, I hope you can forgive him eventually. I think he really does love you. He just got caught up in trying to be someone he wasn't. She reached over and patted my hand. You're a good girl, Natasha. Too good for the likes of this old situation. When I left Sunrise Manor that evening, I felt lighter somehow. Not because everything was resolved, but because I'd reminded myself why I'd started helping in the first place. Not as insurance or leverage, but because someone needed help and I could provide it. Monday morning, I walked into Lisa's office and accepted the department head position. Trevor kept the senior director role, and honestly, he's turned out to be pretty good at it. Having to step into a chaotic situation made him grow up fast, and he's been nothing but respectful and collaborative since everything went down. Greg never came back to work. I heard through office gossip that he took a job with a smaller company in a different city, and that he and his mother eventually worked things out. I hope that's true. As for me, I learned something important about revenge. The most powerful kind isn't about destroying someone else. It's about stopping your own participation in something that doesn't serve you. For 6 years, I'd been enabling Greg's false image of himself while diminishing my own worth. When I stopped doing that, the natural consequences took care of everything else. Sometimes the best revenge is just stepping back and letting people face the reality they've created for themselves. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where you were undervalued despite everything you were contributing? How did you handle it? And please, hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Sometimes the most unbelievable things that happen to us are the ones that are completely true.